Hi, Justin. Hi, Pierce. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. This is my first time interviewing two authors who have co-written one book. Before we get to that book, though, why don't the two of you tell me a little bit about yourselves, your backstory, how you met, and how you got to the point where you both wrote this one book?
All right. So to start off, my name is Justin, and I recently graduated from college. In fact, a year ago today, I graduated college in social work at La Cité. And the way I met Pierce actually was through high school.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, Pierce will just talk about
Yeah.
them for a bit.
I'm studying biochemistry at the University of Ottawa right now. I've been I've been also on the side very interested in other topics though, like literature and other um, ideas that are more working on the problems with like bureaucracy in different fields. And one of the major ones that I have like problems with is academia and stuff, which is what inspired us to work together. His background in social work also kind of pushed him towards that field a little bit more. And but yeah, we both met in high school, and we've always been close friends. Usually, we have a lot of intellectual discussions about things like this, and it's kind of what got us. It's kind of what inspired us to kind of work towards this goal of writing a book together.
And you've written this book called Academic Revolution.
Yeah.
If it's what I think it is, I think I could support a revolution like that.
Yeah.
Tell us all about that book.
Okay, so to begin, for me, writing was always a part of something I kind of grew up writing stuff. In fact, when I went to high school, I wanted to join the concentration in writing. I didn't make it, so like, okay, wait, let me just do it as a side thing. And as I was going, I just kept, flowing with this idea in my head. And then, little do you know, I had a first draft.
Mm.
After that, uh, through one of our intellectual discussions, Pierce brought up that he wanted to write a book himself. Now I said, wait a minute, I have a I have a draft of a book I'm planning to publish. How about you become like the editor and you give me some input on it?
Yeah, like sort of what occurred is that he had finished his first draft, and I was reading through it, and I really started to realize I appreciate the contents of the book. And so it's kind of what inspired us to kind of like cooperate together. And what occurred is during the second and more formal draft of the book, I would go through it, and we slowly realized that we were like transforming the book by adding like new ideas and reshaping the way that we do things. And by the time that we had a second draft of the book, it was almost like a completely new. It still had the huge skeleton of this first draft, but now it had a bunch of new ideas, and it was like completely reformatted with different. It had its own personality and stuff like that because we had.
Mhm.
Um, so like I started off as an editor with the book, but by the end of it, we kind of agreed that we were more like a co. It was more of a co-authorship of the entire project because both of our ideas had kind of completely melded inside the contents.
So now what's the gist of the book? Who's this for, and what does it say?
We try our best to tackle multiple perspectives at a time. So let's say we would talk about how students feel for teachers and for teachers and parents to understand where students are coming from. And then we try to talk about how what teachers do so parents and students can
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from. And then we talk about the school system in general, and we write about that a bit to where show where that's coming from for students and parents, so everyone can come do their part
Yeah,
and
we like the main idea was to try to like get different perspectives together so that people from different places could empathize with what one and the other person are kind of looking at. So from a student's point of view, this is one of the main focuses, obviously, because I think one of obviously main portions of school is looking at the student and how they actually try to learn things. But at the same time, it was important to also try to look at his teacher's perspective when he's trying to elaborate to a student about like a topic in school. And we were trying to look at the interactions between this and also the parent, who's also a very involved presence usually in the academic growth of a student during their time in school. And what we kind of wanted to do is try to find different ways for these people to empathize with each role and try to actually be able to like have a good way of cooperating with these things, because often what happens is that these three different like entities who are working in school often have a lot of pushback against each other, either for different interests or for like different ways of doing things. Generally tend to make it that it's very difficult for a student and a teacher and sometimes the parent to be on the same wavelength, and it tends to harm the entire way that things work and stuff, for usually at the detriment of the student at the end of the day. So I think in general we do have students in mind, but we tend to try to like we try to look at the school of thought of these different people and how they actually what are their interests when it comes to the school and the student.
Yeah. And what part of the educational system are you talking about? Are you talking about high school and college and university, the whole thing? The whole thing?
Yeah, we focus mostly on high school, and we do talk a certain amount about college and the intertwining of it, but we generally focus on the high school and to some extent the middle school level and stuff. The middle school level we generally touch upon more as like the prepping period for high school, but high school I would say is our main focus more.
Well, that's good, because my personal experience, and I did very well in school. I found high school to be the least enjoyable. Now, it could have been puberty, I don't know, but it seemed boring, and it wasn't until I got into university where like, okay, finally now I'm enjoying this. What do you have to say about that?
Well, what I have to say personally is in the book itself, I talk about my experience in elementary and middle school. Since it was a whole different like view on education, it wasn't solely focused on grades. It was actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the Steiner Waldorf education.
No.
If you're not, and that's how my elementary school was based on. It wasn't based on grades. It was more based on like art, learning to play a bit and all that, all that stuff. So I talked about that, and then I made a comparison with high school, my experience through high school, given the fact that it was very well, for one, to illustrate the contrast, and for two, it shows that schools can schools could have a different outlook. It doesn't always need to be grades, mass production, and things.
Yeah, honestly, that's a good point. Actually, it definitely. I think that's one of the things that make high school boring, and it's one of the things that we discuss in the book is the idea that grades become the focal point for a lot of things, and trying more to keep that keep the competition alive when it comes to grades and how they are really impacting the future is like the main focus for most students. And that's one of, I think, the big topics that we discuss throughout the book, mostly in the first chapter. That's like one of our big I think it's the first chapter.
Yeah, it is.
Where we mostly focus on like how school really has this very mass production type look on it. But that's actually one of the main first things that we discuss in the book is how the Industrial Revolution basically kind of played a big part in how it really makes high school streamlined to be focusing on jobs and streamlined to be focusing on your career path instead of learning, which is more what elementary school say is like kind of focused on, is actually teaching the child instead of preparing them for a certain like career path.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Now, we're both in Canada, and my education, my elementary education, was in the 60s. I graduated high school in 1974. I imagine it must be very different today. Do you have any knowledge, or did you do any research as to where this all came from, like from, people like me?
Well, I mean, do you mean like in the sense that like of like what's the different like how school has evolved over time?
Yeah, I
In that
wouldn't have a
sense?
clue what high school is like today.
Well, the main difference honestly is the way that it's tackled now has it does have a bit more of the idea of trying to support students and trying to get more people to appreciate school. But the main thing that we discuss in the academic revolution is how, frankly, there's been things that haven't changed, and there's a lot of things that still stay relatively conservative when it comes to I wouldn't say that the personality in high school is the same as it was in the 60s. It's a lot less no one like cares about you if you're failing it, or like, and there's a lot more people who try to like go into like the post-secondary education now. So there's a big push to try to support students. But one of the things that we discuss in the book, and it's like one of the main topics, is how these things tend to bureaucratically stagnate, and they don't tend to really move on to try to actually support students in proactive measures that would be helpful for us today. Like when a student is failing in a class, their main focus is, okay, we're going to we're going to place you into a class that's easier so that you get better grades, because clearly like this class is too fast for you. What that does is it makes this like trickle down system where people who are failing in the system, instead of trying to find strategies to actually help them succeed, they just kind of move them into a lower bracket, which gets them kind of just pushed back into a different way. Frankly, it's a way to kind of pass the buck to another class and to another person without actually helping anyone in the system. It kind of just moves things around and kind of acts like almost like a sand sifter, where the finest grains kind of get to put to the bottom. And in this case, well, it kind of leads to the same idea of, okay, well, who cares? Let's just kind of push it away. It's a lot less, I think, direct today than it was back in the 70s, where if you were failing, you know, go on and try something else aside from school. But it's kind of the same idea in mind. It's just in a different flavor.
I'll also add that by doing so, you you could only get pushed back so many times until you actually have to deal with the next grade. So by only having them pushed back so many times and having, let's say, the next grade, there's no proper tools to actually tackle the next grade the next time you face it.
Yeah.
You know, a great example is like, let's say when we have to do our tests, right? If there's no actual feedback on the last one, we can't really better ourselves for the next one if we're still gonna beat
Yeah, it's
the
the same
same
idea.
problem.
Yeah.
That which is, I'm failing my math class, for example.
Mhm.
Mhm. I went to what is called, they called it comprehensive high school. And, when you're 16, or at least when I was 16, I didn't really pay attention. I mean, I did well, but I didn't pay attention to the politics of it all. They put me in because I had high marks. They put me in the academic program. And then there was another program, I forget the name of that, but that's where people were basically trained to become, workers, as you say.
Mhm.
But in
Yeah.
my case, they pushed and pushed until, I eventually went to university, and I did well there,
Mhm.
like I said. So I didn't feel any kind of, I mean, I was bored in high school because it seemed like we were always playing catch up to the people who didn't understand stuff.
Mhm.
And in fact, my son said the same thing. He got to a point in high school where he says, I'm bored with this. I have to wait until everybody figures it out. I figured it out last month. So
Yeah.
that kind of thing still goes on, as far as I know.
I mean, frankly, the thing with that is that there is obviously a huge spectrum in understanding with people and like how well they're able to excel in school. And I think that that's one of the biggest troubles that school has, is trying to find a good balance for people, because frankly, when you have 1,000 people in a single school, there are bound to be people from the entire spectrum of, like, there are people who have finished all of their work and they're able to understand things very quickly. And then there are people who might need about twice or three times the amount of time to understand a single class than the average person. Now, frankly speaking, the school doesn't really know, like in general, school systems don't really have a strategy to be able to deal with this huge gap in abilities. And what they do is exactly what we were saying. That's how the sifting method kind of works. If you're really fast, they're going to try to push for those people to get put at the top of the line or whatever, and they get the schooling that kind of pushes them to university, and it tries to kind of curtail to that. But the people who are like of any other bracket what they just generally get is a more almost mediocre type of learning in some way, where, okay, if you're anything less than top university material, you get to put in maybe secondary type of like a secondary like focus of like, okay, you can go to university, but it's more to try to like focus on just getting a bachelor's instead of doing whatever you can. And if you're not that good, then you're like, okay, well, your grades are slightly lower than what you'd like for that. Here's like maybe a college program. And if you're, even lower than that, then it's like, okay, well, maybe you're good for the workforce. And the thing is that although that technically works, like to do that, it doesn't really give people like what happens is it doesn't allow people to actually focus on what interests them. It more goes by like what is available to you, which you know for people who are like bored in high school or whatever because they're too advanced, what they're basically kind of stuck with is doing the classes that are the hardest just because, okay, well, I'm smart and I'm able to do calculus. Well, why not do it? But that's just because like now this person who has good grades is kind of being pushed towards science, even if maybe that's not what interests them. And someone else who could be interested in science just because they say struggled in math in 10th grade, now they're no longer they're no longer being pushed into science. They're like, okay, well, you're failing math. Maybe you should try something else, And now this person who was interested in science and who might have been able to actually excel in it if they had actually been given, a little bit of further support in that like one class, might have been able to become a great scientist. But now instead, who knows? Maybe they'll just work at work at a shop somewhere, and and this happens all the time where people, fall into one category or another just because it's easier for the school system to kind of do that than to try to nourish a single student on what their interests are.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised by very good parents. My father was an intellectual, and he inspired me to be curious about everything. And that's where it started for me. I never stopped learning. I read. I'm always curious about things. Is that what you're also talking about?
Yes. And the thing what happens is that we often, well, like the quote says, we often think that learning only happens in school. Actually, it's something that I think Pierce brought up. You know, the student thinks, no, the parents think all the learning happens at school. Teachers think all the learning happens at home, but only the student knows that learning happens in both ways. So reason more for them to collaborate. That's one. Also, outside of school, you could learn from anything. I could learn from you, you could learn from me, I could learn from peers. There's everyday learning you could learn from. No one there's the person who goes into university and have those good grades and everything, they're used to just performance grades, pressure, Excel, all that. And since it comes so easy to them, if they get anything lower than what they expect, they go bananas.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the problem. They don't know how to deal with that. They were never exposed to the ups and downs of the grades to be able to learn, oh, I got an A plus. Yes. What could I do to maintain it? Oh shit, I got a D. How could I get better? Okay, I have a C now. I could see what I could do. And then B, back to D, back to A, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, honestly, learning how to even, I think the main idea in that is just like even understanding like that it's not just what's being taught in school, but it's also that how school prepares you for life is sometimes something that is important that people don't see. I think one of the most powerful parts of that quote is like understanding how understanding how school can kind of teach you a life lesson instead of just what's being taught in like the classroom. You can learn in math or whatever, like how to do a function with X and Y, but for most people, that's not going to be as valuable as understanding, okay, if you fail, like say a math test, for example, but you like really take the time to not give up and you actually like study it harder, you can learn it. And you can do that with any course as long as you take the time to really study it pragmatically. that's a
I was going to say that's just, and that's one core element, which is perseverance.
exactly
that though.
But that's exactly it. That school in itself won't teach every student that. It'll only teach a handful of students that who take the time to really appreciate that kind of lesson. But realistically speaking, these are the kind of things that school should be trying to highlight with a lot of people that they don't is if you're failing at this, you can do so much better if you actually apply yourself. And here are the pragmatic ways that you can help yourself to reach that goal. There's a bunch of different things that school can learn like that. Socializing is another example. We touch on that a little bit in the book too, is just understanding how to really communicate and interact with people is a very important and critical thing that school teaches us, but it's done. These are things that are done more. They're done more subliminally. They're not a very like expressly communicated thing is try to be social or try to interact in a social setting and find how to learn to be to how to develop a sense of self and stuff. These are all things that we do in some way invariably in high school, but they're never something that's actually focused on by the school. It's something that you're supposed to try to figure out yourself as a student, which in some ways is good, but at the same time what happens is some people never really understand, like take the time to understand some of these things. In school some people give up and they're not, once they get that D, as Justin was saying, they don't actually try to work to get that C anymore because they don't see like that between A and D there's a huge gap of like actually trying to understand these two things that they actually can attain. They just see this huge grade gap between a 50% and an 80, and they don't see the ability to just like be able to grow between these two. They just see, okay, there's such a huge gap, it's unattainable for me to get an A, may as well just not touch this, and move on.
Yeah. The book is called Academic Revolution. What's the revolution part?
I would say that the academic revolution is trying to break this idea of bureaucracy that we have on school. I'd say that's a strong hold to it. I think COVID in itself definitely did have a huge point in trying to get people more interested in how we learn. It was what I think Justin's idea with that is mainly that when we were online, we started to realize like what it's like to be learning when we had to take a step back and just do it from our home. Now we had a completely different setting and environment, and I think for a lot of people, at least for us, we were starting to really start to criticize what is effective and what is completely ineffective in school, both online and when we come back in person. What really sucks about school and like how to actually improve it. And I think one of the main things that needs to actually improve for us to be able to really have a huge change in improvement in school is breaking down a lot of the bureaucratic barriers that stop us from being able to properly teach students things.
Yeah.
School is extremely immersed in politics, and how we learn is completely based on that level. And what happens is that it's to only the detriment really of the students, because often what will happen is they try to find ways to accommodate people in ways that will harm others, say, and one of the main ways that they do that is by, like I said, trying to make things easier. That's one of the main difficulties, instead of trying to push students. But the main revolution is essentially trying to break away from this idea that school is to just develop into a specialized career path, and more trying to actually help students learn.
That's right.
There's a big discrepancy between these two ideas, but it's an important one to make for students to be able to appreciate from it.
Also, you mentioned earlier that your father nurtured you with curiosity, right? He nurtured you with the ability of loving to learn and all that. One of the things I think that they don't really do properly is how we talked about is they teach you certain thing, and after that it just stops, right? It kind of kills the curiosity that you have. And once you're curious about something, you'll just want to learn about everything.
Yeah.
And if you if you're curious to learn about a specific thing, you'll have fun learning, right? This is what I call innate learning. If if you have a passion for it, if you have a passion for learning, you'll learn about math, science, history, all that on your own. And since it's on your own, there's no telling you when to stop.
Yeah.
As opposed to school, the grades, let's say, it's considered that when you have 100% or an A+, you've memorized everything.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably far from the truth. And after that, the person, once they achieve that A+, it's like, okay, what's the point? I'm done. I learned everything.
So now let's find out where we can buy this book.
The main place you could buy it is Amazon. And there's actually a couple of stores where we live that it is available at.
Yeah, locally in Ottawa, there are plenty of places to buy them in physical copies, but for people who live further away, such as in Nova Scotia, for example, an online copy version is still probably the best option. We're also going to be working on an audiobook soon that will be available possibly by the end of the year, I believe.
Yeah.
About that. So that's also going to be a way to be able to get the book, and we're making sure that we try to make it as accessible for everyone to be able to
Excellent.
get it.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm very impressed with this. I think it's a great idea. I think you've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish both of you success in the future. And if you have any other books you are going to write in the future, give me a call. We'll talk about those as well.
Certainly, it would be wonderful. We'd love that.
It's been great meeting you.
Thank you.
Likewise, it's been very
Take care.
appreciated.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Bye-bye.
And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.